Okay, Congressman McCaul, obviously it's been a busy week for you in DC. I just want you to first and foremost kind of talk about the things that you just accomplished with the NDAA passing.
Well, National Defense Authorization is probably one of the most important bills we pass, in the Congress. I was fortunate enough to have many bills in there. My Fentanyl Act passed, which allows us to sanction countries that make fentanyls and ship them into the United States, like say China. Also strengthens our law enforcement to stop them from coming in. We've had about 100,000 young people die this year from fentanyl overdose. And that's more than we lost in Vietnam over 2 decades. And we need to stop that from happening. I also have my Ukraine war crimes bill to help us gather evidence to prosecute those responsible for these horrific atrocities occurring in Ukraine. I had my Cyber Diplomacy Act for the State Department, so we can better negotiate cyber diplomacy. And then one for me, I think in the Austin audience, they would find interesting is my Peace Through Music Diplomacy Act, which allows us to harness the power of music as a international language, if you will, across the world to spread our message of freedom and democracy and our foreign policy against these nations that practice tyranny and oppression.
Gotcha. I want to expand a little bit about Ukraine. Right now, obviously, the United States is helping a lot with in terms of funding for them and their efforts. Do you see that the amount that we are giving to Ukraine right now is something that's sustainable and something that will continue when leadership changes in January for the House?
I still think you have very strong bipartisan support, House, Senate. There are elements on both sides of the aisle that may disagree. We will have more oversight and accountability to know where the money's going. And we'll have more time to look at the bills before they go to the floor. And I think that's what the American taxpayer deserves. But our commitment to Ukraine is not going to wane. But I do urge the administration, as I talked to Secretary of State Blinken, to Chairman of Joint Chiefs just the other day at the Army-Navy game, that we have to give them everything they need right now to win this thing. They are winning in Ukraine. They are on the offensive. They have the Russians on their heels, and the Russians are demoralized. We've destroyed their military without one American soldier, but we got to make sure we give them everything they need to get the job done now. The longer this drags out, the more it plays to Putin's advantage, and the less of the will the American people, I think, you'll see. So I think time is very much of the essence.
Somewhat similarly, but in that same idea of, how we're helping other countries. I know you also had a bill in there related to Taiwan and support for Taiwan. How much are you hoping that, any efforts that we have here in our Congress will sort of mitigate China's influence, perhaps sending a similar message to what we did with Russia when helping Ukraine and siding with them in that war?
Well, deterrence is the key. I thought we should put weapons in before, Putin's invasion. We waited till after. In Taiwan, we were trying to put weapons in now before an invasion to show deterrence. The better Ukraine does, the more of a deterrent it is to China invading Taiwan. So my Taiwan Policy Act does a lot of, it helps with joint training, which we had with the Ukrainians. It helps with foreign military sales and financing to get the weapons into Taiwan. I think people, the reason why Taiwan, in my judgment, is so important, they manufacture 90% of the advanced semiconductor chip manufacturing for the world. If Taiwan invaded tomorrow, they would either control that or they would destroy it. And that would send us into a major global depression. That's another reason why I introduced and passed my Chips for America Act, so we could manufacture these national security asset chips here in the United States rather than in countries like Taiwan that are vulnerable to a Chinese invasion. So this is a very dangerous time when you look at the alliances between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Iran's got their drones in Crimea now, and North Korea is sending their artillery shells to the Russians as I speak. So that's why this bill is so important.
Going back to fentanyl, that's not normally something that you would think to be in the National Defense Authorization Act. So talk a little bit more about why you pushed for this in this specific piece of package deal, and how you hope that law enforcement here on the ground in Texas and in this district in particular, which, as you know, have been very affected by the fentanyl crisis.
Well, I think it's directly tied when you have a foreign nation adversary sending fentanyls and precursors to fentanyls through Mexico to come into the United States to then kill Americans more than we lost in Vietnam. I consider that to be a national security issue, a national security threat. It is toxic. It's poisonous. So the ability to sanction countries like China for this behavior, to strengthen our law enforcement, to stop the flow before it enters the United States, will protect particularly our younger generation that is primarily affected by this epidemic, I call it now. They look at it in terms of history on the opium wars, where, the UK was sending in opiates into China, and it was killing Chinese people, and they were making money off this. This is almost like a reverse opium war, where China is sending this into the United States, making money, and at the same time killing Americans. It's a very dangerous policy, and we need to stop it.
I know a lot of that is coming in through our southern border. So transitioning to another topic that we're seeing a problem play out right now in El Paso, there is a major surge of migrants crossing the border. Although that's not your district, this is, of course, a Texas issue. It's a congressional issue. A lot of them are crossing over illegally, but some of them are asylum seekers. So in your opinion, do you think there needs to be some, or I guess, what should Congress be doing to change our asylum seeking laws? As we've been hearing from people on the ground there, that's a major problem right now, and the differences of how to process those folks who are escaping actual really threatening situations in their home countries.
And I've dealt with this issue ever since I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, right, in my hometown in Austin, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. What they see is the rescission of Title 42, which was a way to deport people at the border based on health reasons. The administration has basically given an announcement that's going to be lifted. And so now you're seeing another surge. But I go back to the policies that we're working, that I had worked on as well. And that is the Remain in Mexico policy, the migrant protection protocols, which deals with political asylum. We have to end catch and release. But we also have to go back to remain in country of origin when they apply for political asylum. Because once they touch base in the United States, because we don't have detention space, because of catch and release, they're released into our society and they disappear. If they remain in country of origin, like in Mexico or Central America, then once their claim is adjudicated, they can either come into the United States or remain in their country of origin. In fact, about only 15% of these claims are legitimate political persecution claims, and they have every right to come in if they have that. But if it's just based on economic, that's not sufficient under the law. So I would say we'd have to go back to that policy. Unfortunately, it's gotten way too politicized. So I'm going to be the incoming chairman of Foreign Affairs. I plan to go down to Mexico and Central America and talk to them about these political asylum agreements that maybe we could enter into with these countries that then would actually stop this at its very origin, rather than having to deal with it on the 1 yard line, on our goal line, with 1 yard out, and or when they're actually in our country. So to me, that's smart policy. It shouldn't be political. And the cartels are very smart, and they know when we changed the law exactly what that meant. And that was that business is open in the United States, and there's a green light to come in. And that's why you've seen almost 5 million come in since this president came into office.
Is there anything Congress should do in the short term, though, with Title 42 ending? I know a couple of your colleagues, including Senator Cornyn, Representative Cuellar, were calling for extension of Title 42. With that being pandemic specific, obviously not really a long-term solution. So, what can we be doing right now to help with this as we keep seeing surges of migrants down at our Texas-Mexico border?
Well, we have our big spending bill end of the year what they call omnibus or a continuing resolution, whatever the name's going to be. And I think we need to make it clear in there that we, bipartisan, want this policy extended. Now, how can we have all this money going for COVID relief, right, domestically, and yet lift the Title 42 restrictions to allow people we don't know anything about come into the United States and not even test them, but then not be able to deport them if, say, we can test and they have COVID? I mean, this is, it makes no sense to me. Because on one hand, you're saying we got a real problem in the United States we're going to put billions of dollars into, but we don't think we have that problem at the Mexican border. So we're going to lift Title 42 restrictions. To me, logically, that just makes no sense at all.
So obviously you want Remain in Mexico to be back in place. Do you think Title 42 should be extended?
Of course, just for the reasons I stated, because if you have a policy to put billions into our domestic economy because the COVID problem is so bad, and yet you're ignoring that at the border and lifting Title 42, those two policies are incongruent. They don't make any sense at all to me.
Do you think Title 42, though, is a little bit of a Band-Aid as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think it is. I think eventually, if we can't get this political asylum process under control, we're going to continue to have this problem at the border. It's a direct cause and effect. What the administration did by rescinding it day one was a direct cause and effect to the cartels to bring innocent women and children, in many cases, biggest human trafficking event of my lifetime, not to mention the fentanyls that are killing, thousands of our young people every day.
All right, Congressman McCaul, I think I used all of our 10 minutes up. Was there anything else you wanted to add while I have you?
I think that covers it pretty well.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And happy holidays to you and your family.
You too. Thank you so much.